A second time. I call the member for Braddon.
Well, thank you, Deputy Speaker, and thank you to my good friend and colleague from the other Tasmanian, one of the other Tasmanian seats in the seat of Lions in Tasmania, for warming up the crowd. I'd like to thank Mr Hutchison for that, and it's a great opportunity to take the stage after him because he made some very valid points. Very valid points. This man who represents the seat of Lions exceptionally well fully understands, like every other member on this side of the House, that we have a job in front of us. We've got a big job in front of us. We've been trying to do that job for 2.5 years, and God willing, and with the support of the Australian people, we'll continue to do it for another 3 and a bit years. Now, Mr Deputy Speaker, the member who just concluded his contribution very clearly articulated the state of the nation's finances. So I don't necessarily need to go over that ground, other than to say he is spot on. He is spot on. And we have, on this side of the House, since our election in September 2013, been trying to do everything we possibly can to get the country's finances under control. Under control. Under control is very simple in its methodology. It means you spend less than you earn. It's a pretty easy principle for every Australian to understand. You spend less than you earn. We've all been brought up that way, I would hope, and we all understand the ramifications should we enter into a lifestyle that continually leads to spending more than we earn, because we end up with big debts we can't pay, big debts that cost interest that is then taken out of our disposable income, which leaves us with less money, to spend on food in a family sense, or less money to spend on health or education or infrastructure in a governmental sense. It's pretty well a standard, shall I say, accounting practice that you try very hard to spend less than you earn. But that's not been the case with the previous government and the ramifications that were left to us to fix up. So we still find ourselves every morning, as I often say, when the alarm clock goes off, we will spend today $100 million. $100 million more than we earn. And that'll go on tomorrow and the day after and the day after and the day after, until such time as a credible government, a government that is actually hell-bent on living out that model of lifestyle of spending less than you earn, until we get it under control. And we have worked exceptionally hard up against some very strong headwinds by those opposite to try and find ways to bring about that budget constraint, and to try and find ways to bring the budget closer and closer and closer to a positive, or what we would call a surplus position. It may be of interest to those listening that the welfare bill in this country now exceeds $150 billion. That's $150,000 million per year. Thank you, Member for Cowan. Per year. That's what we spend on welfare. That includes, obviously, the disability pension, the age pension, New Start, youth allowance, so on and so forth. And I think it's fair to say, Mr Deputy Speaker, and I'm sure everyone would agree, that Australians are generally very fair-minded. They're very fair-minded. They generally work hard for their income. They pay their tax, all of us with a degree of hesitation, but we pay our tax in the full knowledge that a part of the hard-earned money we pay tax on will go to provide a safety net for those Australians that find themselves from time to time, or in some cases in perpetuity, that they need our help. They need a safety net, and we provide welfare provisions to those people. And every fair-minded Australian has no issue with that in providing a safety net. Where I think they leave the train on this matter is when they see a safety net for some become a trampoline. They don't like that. They don't like their hard-earned taxes being abused or used or taken for granted. They like to know that their hard-earned taxes are being put to work fairly and in proportion to need. And that brings me to the point of this bill. And I want to congratulate the work of the Minister for Social Services, Mr Porter, and those that have gone before him in this portfolio role. This is a tough gig to be the Minister for Social Services, with a welfare bill of over $150 billion every year. Another point of information just on that I forgot to mention is that if you walk down your local main street, anywhere in your community, you'll come across 10 tax-paying individuals. Well, the first 8 of those that you meet, their taxes are going to meet the welfare bill of this nation. That's 8 out of every 10 personal payers of income tax. 8 out of 10. 8 out of 10. A fact that should not be missed on anyone. So I do understand the pressures that are in this portfolio area, and I thank the Minister for his ongoing tenacity in trying to find ways to maintain the safety net, to maintain the fairness, but at the same time within his budget to find those areas where in fact we can claw back some of the funds that hard-working taxpayers are paying. And in this case, this one's an absolute Monty. This one, Mr Deputy Speaker, is an absolute Monty. To cut to the chase, why is it in this country that you can in fact owe money to the government because you have been overpaid for possibly reasonable reasons, or maybe not so reasonable reasons? You've been the beneficiary of hard-earned tax-paying Australians' money in possibly sometimes the full knowledge that you didn't really deserve it. But you've taken it anyway because you know that you haven't updated your information with Centrelink, that you haven't been quite as transparent in the declaration of your income. I also accept there are some people that find themselves making genuine mistakes, so let me put that on the record. But hard-working taxpayers across Australia don't expect for 1 minute people to be the recipient of their hard work in the full knowledge that they're receiving money they shouldn't. And then to make matters worse, to find out that the government agency that is the mediator of the provision of that money to these people fails to go after that money and up against the legislation it works with, after 6 years basically forgets that it ever existed. Now, the numbers that were presented to this chamber just a few moments ago by my fellow amigo from the seat of Lions are very startling figures. So why is it that we have a situation that someone can do the wrong thing, or not do the wrong thing, but irrespective, find themselves owing the country, the government, money that no longer has to be collected? It just falls off the end of a cliff somewhere, and people just wake up one day and go, how lucky are we? The government has lost its passion to follow the pursuit of that debt, and we just say it's all okay, brother and sister, just don't worry about it, we're not fussed. Well, Mr Deputy Speaker, on behalf of the hard-earning taxpayers of Australia, that's not what they expect their taxes to do. So in this bill, what it does, it provides 2 measures which strengthens the capacity of the agency and the government to recover social welfare and family payment debts, and I stress the word debts. It amends legislation to allow for the use of departure prohibition orders to prevent targeted social welfare debtors from leaving the country. There are some conditions around that which I'll come to if I have time. These are the same rules, Mr Deputy Speaker, and I hasten to add, that already exist for debts in child support. And everyone to a man and a woman in this place would stand behind the fact that if someone owes child support, they should pay it. And the legislation around child support does allow the capacity to actually chase debt and prevent people from leaving the country if in fact they still owe child support money. The second amendment to the piece of legislation we're talking about is to remove the current 6-year limitation on the recovery of social welfare debt that would otherwise be non-recoverable, and it aligns the treatment of social welfare debt with the recovery arrangements in place for other Commonwealth agencies. I'm not sure who the goose was that actually suggested some time ago, whether it was from this side of the House or the other, I don't really care. Not a very smart move to suggest that after 6 years people can just fall off the end of the cliff and we don't care anymore, to use the previous speaker's language, to go dark. When hard-earned taxpayers have stepped up to the plate in a willing manner to provide a safety net to the vulnerable, only to have it smacked back in their face. I think this is a tremendous rearrangement of this legislation, a very positive amendment that hard-working taxpayers in Australia would have expected we would have done years ago. A debt to the Commonwealth can occur, as I said a moment ago, under differing circumstances, sometimes intentional and sometimes not intentional, but irrespective of the motive, the money is owed. I hasten to add that sometimes I unintentionally accrue too much of a power bill, electricity bill in my household. Sometimes it's intentional, sometimes it's unintentional. But at the end of the day, the bill comes. Last I checked, they still wanted their money. And if I don't pay it, I suspect I'd end up with a big smart sticker, or worse still, I'd go to turn my lights on one night and they're not going to work. It's a principle of life. You owe money, you pay it back. Now, while the average value of social welfare debt is $2,357, you might say, well, gee, member for Braddon, that's not a lot of money. And the average length of debt is within the 6-year limitation period. It's just over 3 years. The oldest outstanding debt, according to the records, is over 30 years old, and the greatest amount of debt is in excess of $300,000. But at the end of June, this is a really important figure, Mr Deputy Speaker, there were over 1 million debts with a value of $3.04 billion. That's $3,000 million of hard-working Australian taxpayers' money. I'm not for one moment going to stand here and justify any reason why we shouldn't go after that money, particularly when these hard-earned taxpayers are doing everything they can to support their families. So these prohibition orders are an obvious place to start. Why should someone who's providing the hard-earned taxpayers' money to provide for welfare have to save up for years and years and years to go on a family holiday, when in fact someone can leave the country tomorrow to sit up on a beach and read a book in Honolulu, owing $10,000, for example, to Centrelink and the Australian government? This is common sense, Mr Deputy Speaker. This is absolute common sense. Yes, it's carrot and it's stick. I accept that. At the end of the day, why should someone be able to leave this country that they've got sufficient enough funds to go on a holiday but still owe money to the government? Now, I very quickly, in the 1 minute I have left, want to just assure people that where there are hardship issues, the government hasn't failed them. The government has taken those into consideration within this bill. If there are extreme cases and hardship cases, if someone doesn't have money and, for example, are being lent money by other members of the family to go to someone's funeral or so on and so forth, these prohibition orders can be lifted for that period of time. The Commonwealth also reserves the right to hold on to a bond of some description to make sure that people aren't leaving the country and not returning. I can't think of a fairer piece of legislation, a fairer piece. Takes into account genuine cases of hardship. We're not going to stop someone from attending a family event such as a funeral, even if they do owe money. But what we want to do is to ensure that we are good stewards, very good stewards of the hard-working, tax-paying men and women of Australia who every week see their taxes go to provide a safety net. Let's make sure that they maintain their faith in that system, and this amendment allows